Welcome to Metaphysical Communion 11. I am your host, DeAngelis Colon, and this evening we're going to have a fascinating lecture and discussion about a particular subject in the cryptozoology new field. I have been interested in this particular aspect for the past 2.5 years, when I just learned about it for the first time. I was very fascinated by this, and I started doing more research and finding out more, obviously. And then, fortunately, with the help of television, several programs have been presented in the last few years relating to this particular, creature that we're going to talk about more this evening. So, celebrating the full wolf moon, which happens on January 28th, and all things of wolf, this is our program for this evening, wolf. So, welcome everyone once again. We're going to spend the next hour talking about a very interesting cryptid known as the werewolf, or the dogman, or simply wolf. Now, wolves have been familiar to us for countless generations. We know them as these wonderful wild animals out in the plains, living in packs of 10, 12 or so. They are very communal, creatures. They watch out for one another, very loyal, very strong and protective, very wise, very intelligent. They know how to survive, and they've been doing it for generations after generations. They're a fascinating animal. They are of course, the dog family. They are the grandest, and largest of the dog family, even though they're wild, but they can be tamed. However, they cannot be domesticated. But tamed they have been. And we've seen them, in different areas. People have had them as pets even in their homes or their ranches, usually because they need wide open space, obviously. This is not an animal that you keep in an apartment. But they can be tamed, and they are quite loyal and quite wonderful once you have them trained, especially from birth, because it's a little harder to train an animal of this kind once they've grown, or certainly into adulthood. It's not the same. They have a instinctive nature to stay away from humans, even though from time to time they have become somewhat friendly because of certain circumstances, whether you live close to them or so, you feed them, you show them that you're not going to harm them. And with certain of them, they have been known to come in and be rather friendly, but that's uncommon. But other than that, we've known about wolves, forever. We've seen them in Yellowstone Park, where they've reintroduced them in the last few years, and they're starting to thrive there once again. We've known them through Native American history. Also, we know that the Native Americans revere them greatly as animal spirits and animal totems. We know them from the New Age movement as well for their spirituality, related once again to Native American here in the United States, but in other areas of the world also. They are known for their spirituality and for being animal totems, as well. So they have a long, wonderful history, and we've incorporated them into our civilization in different forms, some that I just alluded to, obviously. And we are going to begin, obviously, with the inspiration for this program, which is the full wolf moon, which happens every January. And this is due to the fact that wolves are known to be howling a great deal more around this time of the year. We're in deep winter right now, and this is the cold season. And of course, these animals are hunters, and they find it difficult at times to find prey, especially in regions of the United States, for instance, that have a great deal of cold, lots of snow, temperatures, going down to 0 at times and below. And yet these animals are very strong, very hardy, and they survive. But surviving can be very harsh, very difficult for them. And sometimes they go hungry. And when they howl at the moon a great deal or howl extensively in the nights, it's usually because out of hunger. So this is also known as the hunger moon as well. These names, these terms come from Native American beliefs and spirituality, from their thousands of years of observation, of living amongst the wolves for so long, from everything in their culture. And we know that Native Americans are very closely aligned to nature and aligned to spirit. They revere the animals of the world, and each one has a particular designation. Each one can be a totem, especially again here in the United States of America. So we have, of course, the wolf, we have the eagle, the beaver, the grouse, different animals of the woods, or so. They revere all living things. They incorporate them, their animus, their spirituality into their culture, into their belief systems. They assign traits and characteristics that are related to these animals, to their spirituality. They inspire others to follow the ways of the animals, the positive characteristics, and as well the negative ones too, because everything does have a positive and a negative associated with it. So they're not blind to the negative aspects or characteristics of things and of these animals, but they incorporate them all and find strength into that and inspire others to follow those traits, those characteristics. So this month in particular, and I have a presentation that's going to be accompanying me this evening with this. So let us hope that it works, well. So I'm going to share the screen right now and see if that comes up for a second. Let's see. Let's see for a second here. I hope this works. And I'm going to give it a try for you, okay? And hopefully it will work in some way. Here we go. Let's see. Let me just bring that up for a second here. And we're going to share, our presentation for this evening here, with us. So we begin, of course, as I said, with, our moon for January. And that is the full moon, known as the wolf moon. That happens on January 28th, this year, which is a few days away, next Wednesday. And that falls under the zodiac sign of Leo, this year. I've heard others say that it falls under the sign of Cancer, also. So there's always usually a debate between which sign this falls under. But I will go with the sign of Leo, since that's the one that I have read the most that is aligned with this particular moon, for this year. And that's especially meaningful to me since I happen to be a Leo. So great characteristics. So for those who are Leos, this particular year with this wolf moon, we're going to have a little extra advantage here, a little extra gift, coming with this energy, toward us, here. So as you see here, we have our full wolf moon. The Old Farmer's Almanac, mentions this in many different sources from Native America, colonial America, and European sources. Traditionally, each moon name was applied to the entire lunar month in which it occurred, not just to the full moon itself. It's thought that January's full moon came to be known as the wolf moon because wolves were more often heard howling at this time, as I said earlier. It was traditionally believed that wolves howl due to hunger during winter, but we know today that wolves howl for other reasons. Howling and other wolf vocalizations are generally used to define territory, locate pack members, reinforce social bonds, and coordinate, hunting. So all of those behaviors, fall under this particular time period. And that falls, for the peoples of the Old West, for the Native Americans, because these were people that lived outdoors, obviously. They were under the same conditions and climate as the wolves, were as well. So they too faced a lot of these hardships, and they too had to do a lot of things regarding, staying close to their members of their tribe, working together, reinforcing bonds, to work together, to go hunting together, coordination of hunting, vocalizations as well too. In order to, communicate from great distances. So they would practice animal noises, practice things, to be able to locate one another from great distances. These are people outdoors after all. So we will, excuse me one moment, I do have someone who's participating with our event here. So let me see if I can allow them in to our space. And let me just come out of here for a moment. I'll come back in again. So hang on a pinch so I can allow our person in, if that is what they choose to do. Let's see. And if not, they're just watching, then I just got an alert for them. But apparently they must be watching and doesn't require to be allowed in. Let me just check one more little thing here just to make sure that I'm not leaving them out. All right, very good. So no, they're just watching, but I'm glad that you're watching me because I just got the alert, before. So at this point, we'll return to our screen once again. And here we go. Here we are. So this, they related very closely with the animals because they too were living in nature. They had to follow the same type of protocols, the same way of life as many of the animals do in order to survive in the wilderness, on the plains. And it was a harsh, way of existence for everyone. But they learned, from the animals that they were surrounded around, and they learned how to live in these environments. Now, for this particular moon, for this month, and this once again is coming up on the 28th, it'll be best seen at moonrise, wherever you are. So it will appear as an orange orb and swap to pale yellow as it rises, before becoming too bright and white to look at comfortably. They say that this full wolf moon will be in the constellation of Cancer, the crab. So it may be, or it may be in the constellation of Leo. Apparently they're very close together, trading off on that particular day and time. I know here in the east, the moon will be full at approximately 2:16 p.m., which means that in California in the west and southwest, it will be more like 11:16 a.m. at that time period. Nevertheless, when the evening comes, we will see it at its peak, at its brightest and most luminous, and we'll be able to gain and gather all of the energy that it brings, to us. So be prepared with rituals, be prepared with your incense, say your prayers, put out to the wolf moon energy what you desire. It's the first moon of the year as well. It's the coldest time of the year also. We are in deep winter right now. So here in the Northeast especially, and the northern quadrant of the United States, we are experiencing a great deal of cold. And a lot of people are cloistered right now and staying in and making themselves comfortable. So this is a good opportunity to continue and, light your candles, bring in your incense, do your meditation, to the wolf moon energy. Bring in all the positive aspects and characteristics that this moon has to offer for you. It will help you with strength, with determination, with loyalty, with responsibility, with carrying through for things. These are a lot of the characteristics and traits that wolves, are known for. So instill that within you. Work your magic. Amazing things can happen. It's a wonderful moon. It's one of my most favorite moons of the year. I relate very beautifully with the wolves because they have a spirit of freedom. They have a spirit of intellect, of thinking on their feet, being very clever. There's an association with wisdom, with them also. And I love all of those traits and characteristics. I like to instill them in myself as well. I love freedom a great deal. I love independence, as well. And so I share a lot of those traits. I relate, to them. They're wild, wonderful creatures with great big hearts. And they love their family. They stay close to them. They protect them to death if necessary. They raise their youngs beautifully. They teach them how to survive on their own when the time comes. They take care of each other. And the pack stay together for life. So there are many wonderful traits, associated, with the wolves. They're very civilized, even though they're living in wild nature. They have a communication amongst themselves. They have a culture. They have a knowing. Wonderful ways, and they survive. Despite everything, they manage to live out in the wilderness, and they survive. So those are things to admire, about them. So, in regards to Native American spirituality or so, we know that Arctic and in North America, especially in most Native American cultures, wolves are considered medicine, being associated with courage, strength, loyalty, and success at hunting. And obviously, the peoples of the tribes and the plains admire the wolves greatly, and they instill those traits within themselves. So they see that each animal has its value, has its wisdom, has its way of existing in the world. They incorporate that into each and every individual. Wolves can be known as spirit guides for many people. Many people have a close affinity, with that as an animal totem. And for instance, when wolf materializes as your spirit animal, it's time to make your position known. Wolf as a totem animal belongs to those who can break away from the pack. So there is your strength and there is your independence. Call in wolf as your power animal when you need help placing trust in others. For wolves can be very knowing and wise, and they know who in their pack they can rely on and who will be loyal to them. And they also know those who may be rogue or may, challenge them, also. They are very, foreknowing, as I'll call it that way. So they're a wonderful animal spirit to have and a wonderful animal spirit to call upon in times of need. When you need courage, when you need wisdom, when you need to feel a sense of loyalty and trust for others and even for yourself. Wolf spirit animal. The wolf offers some of the most striking animal meanings in the realm of spirit animals. The power of the wolf brings forth instinct, intelligence, appetite for freedom, and awareness of the importance of social connections. This animal can also symbolize fear of being threatened and fear of being threatened and lack of trust. When the wolf shows up in your life, pay attention to what your intuition is telling you. They are very, very closely aligned with spirit. As I have been preparing this lecture for the evening, especially the last 2 days I was putting this, piece, together here to demonstrate for you this evening, I was really immersing myself a great deal in their spirit and getting attuned, to their animus. And today was very interesting because as I was going about, business, I happened to be going outside a little bit of work today for the first time in many, many months. I had some things to do. So as I was going along, I went to one or two places and I would look and there was suddenly a book that said Dogman, for instance. And that's fascinating. I'll explain a little bit more what that means later in the evening. And then I saw as I was coming home on my bicycle this evening, I stopped at a red light at the corner of an intersection And for those of us who are sensitive, we know that intersections of roadways or streets can be portals of spirit. They carry an opening, an energy for spiritual connections and going between the dimensions and the worlds. So, as I was awaiting for the light to change at this corner, I looked across the street and there was a young man, and next to him on a leash was a beautiful dog that looked very much like a wolf. I am sure it was a beautiful Siberian Husky because he was absolutely gorgeous. In fact, that dog looked a lot like these two here, depicted here, here in the presentation. So it looked very, very much like this, very beautiful. I had beautiful blue eyes as well. And apparently he was quite young because the young man seemed to be training him in a special harness for him and was training him, as they were waiting for the light to change. And finally crossed, I was able to bicycle over and they came towards my direction. I got a good look at this beautiful dog that looked like so much like a wolf. And I look and said, my goodness, I wonder if you have some sort of DNA that's really related more closely to wolves, even though all dogs do. But these in particular, when it comes to a husky or so, or a Malamute, that have a very close physical appearance, as a wolf, in particular. And I looked at this and I saw the beautiful blue eyes, shining in the night. I said, my goodness, that coloring of yours, all that hair, absolutely beautiful, very full, coat of hair, very bushy tail. And even though he was young, but he was a really strong, looking creature. I said, my goodness, I wonder how much wolf DNA you have in you because you're absolutely astoundingly beautiful. So that was beautiful to witness because I was already planning, to prepare, to present this lecture for you this evening. So their spirit connecting with me in that way. I had never seen that dog before, first time. And it just happened to be this very evening that we came together and we passed each other, in the night. And among with the other, synchronicities that I had, today. I always say to myself, when I see things in three, that means that there's a spirit connection. And I certainly had that today. So I know that the spirits of the wolves, are with us this evening, watching over this. It is a tribute, to them and their spirit. And it's just wonderful to get that confirmation. So moving along. Next slide. Now we're going to talk about a different area, of wolves and of these incredible canines. As we know in history, wolves have been incorporated in a myth, in legend, and in stories. In fact, we'll move a little bit down further here. Let's go a little bit into that background first. So, even from Europe, there was always stories about wolves and wolfmen, werewolves. They incorporated it in their stories and stories for adults, stories for children. They were used as learning lessons, actually back a long time ago, back in the 15th, 16th century, especially in the medieval time periods of Europe. So, as it states, the Eastern werewolf or vampire, because there's an alignment, there's an association there, especially from European culture, is found in the folklore of Central and Eastern Europe, including Hungary, Romania, and the Balkans, but as well as Great Britain, Germany especially, as well, and throughout a great part of Europe. While the Western werewolf or sorcerer, as it is known here, has more magical meaning, is found in France, German-speaking Europe, and in the Baltic, as well. So we know a great deal about those particular areas of Europe having always had a close affinity with monsters, with things such as werewolves, with things such as Frankenstein, for instance, or ghouls, goblins, witches. The Brothers Grimm, as we know them so well here, made up these fantastic stories incorporating all those incredible characters. And we know them so well. They're part of our history, part of our lives as well as small children. Stories that tell lessons, especially for children, now, learning lessons. And it certainly was back then. And a lot of times those storybooks, whatever, didn't always have the most positive outcomes. And at times they could be quite gruesome. But it was meant to teach people, things. When you do wrong, bad things happen and may come back to you. Or even the innocent sometimes get hurt. So they use them as a way to educate, their children and people as well through fables and legend. Here in the United States, of course, this was considered much too grotesque and too frightening. So they kind of altered the stories a bit, the fables, and they would give them more of a brighter and sometimes sunnier outcome. However, that is the origin, of these stories. So obviously, when it came to these types of beings or monsters, they would incorporate them in their stories. And this is where wolves or werewolves became better known throughout the public, especially for children, because they would incorporate them in their learning stories, as we see in this ancient or old depiction here, as seen from Germany. It's written in German, so unfortunately I can't write to you what it says, but as you can see, the wolf is being punished and being chased by the townspeople down into a well. So we see somebody hanging there on the side, or that's another wolf, I do believe as well. So that could have been the wolf from Little Red Riding Hood, also. So it's telling you, stories about these creatures. And even stories from way back then. Also, people had to face wolves for real. These were farmers, gatherers at that time, and they had livestock. And as we know, a lot of the wolves would come as predators and take, their chickens, their eggs, their other animals, for food, for sustenance for themselves. So this was always a problem for the farmers and for the people who depended on those animals for their sustenance and also to make a living from. So at times they had to chase them away, the predators, and do what they needed to do and hunt them to protect, their livelihood. So this is where the origin of the wolves and the werewolves came from. So we think. Anyway, so they would make fantastic beings and fantastic creatures, to have ghost stories or horror stories, to frighten, people, for entertainment purposes as well. These people didn't have television or movies, back then. This was their source of entertainment: stories, fables, cartoons. Or so this was their entertainment. So they had to make things exaggerated and these super normal creatures as well to fascinate people, to tantalize the minds and the senses. And we can come down, for instance, to the most famous of these fables, one of the most famous, certainly, Little Red Riding Hood from the Brothers Grimm. And of course, this is where here in America, we first got to really see about, a wolf in stories and anthropomorphizing, a wolf to make it more like relatable to a person. It had a personality, it had a soul with these stories. So Little Red Riding Hood is a European fairy tale about a young girl and a big bad wolf. We learned this from kindergarten and pre-kindergarten about this story. I myself have a book, from childhood that my mother bought me way back when I was a child, thousands of years ago, about Little Red Riding Hood. I still have it. I have many of those books still saved. And it was the first books that I had and that I learned how to read from, as well. So, and this is pre-kindergarten, because my mother always thought that it would be best to teach me how to read way before, from the age of 3 or so, when it was possible to be able to start grasping things such as words and phrases and vowels and consonants and sentence structure or so. So I was taught to read from a very, very early age. And with pictures or so, it made it interesting and fun. So before the time I went to kindergarten, I already knew how to read. So, and this was one of the first stories that I did learn how to read. So, and as many children do, I do believe they still do at this time period. I think some of these things are timeless and never go out, of fashion. So this particular story, its origins can be traced back to the 10th century. to several European folk tales, including one from Italy called The False Grandmother. The two best-known versions were written by Charles Perrault and the Brothers Grimm, and that was after the 10th century. I do believe this was more like the 16th century with the Brothers Grimm or so. And if I'm correct, I think this story came out in 1587. So that was after that. But yet they gathered, the origin and the knowing of the story from even prior, to them, and they just wrote it in their form and their style, and it became worldwide known, and it's legendary at this point in time in our world. So, but we do know the story of Little Red Riding Hood, about going to grandmother's house, and the big bad wolf was stalking Little Red Riding Hood and was hungry and was thinking about eating Little Red Riding Hood, and was trying to be very clever. So the wolf, being a rather sentient and conscious being in this story, it went to grandmother's house, and apparently, I don't know about the older stories. Grandma had not the nicest ending, but I do believe in the stories here, Grandma was placed in a closet as a prisoner, at least from the stories that I read, and the wolf took over her identity and disguised himself as Grandma. So when Little Red Riding Hood came into being, there was Grandma with her cap, and nightgown on, or robe, in the bed, pretending to be Grandma. And Little Red Riding Hood was suspicious, obviously, of Grandma. Oh, Grandma, what big teeth you have. And the wolf felt it better, to eat my dear. I don't remember the story that well. It's been a long time, but it goes along that vein. And luckily, in our stories here in America, Little Red Riding Hood was able to extricate herself from that situation and save herself. I think the wolf didn't have the most pleasant outcome, but at least we have a, let's say, better outcome here than the original story, provided. But this is where children especially get their first introduction into wolf as more of a, let's say, conscious type of being, having a personality, perhaps even having a soul. Then moving along from there, we can then go to wolves in the cinema, and Hollywood comes calling, and movies come calling throughout the world, for these stories. And they hear about these ancient myths and legends from long ago, about such things known as wolfmen, dogmen, werewolves, and the stories that were told in ancient European cultures and then brought here to the United States. And of course, they became more tailored, to American style and tastes, and talking about werewolves and wolfmen or so. And then Hollywood came calling, and so did the script writers and the creative people there. And they started, inventing stories for the American culture, to feast upon in horror films. And then we have the birth of the Wolfman here. So from 1941, we have one of the most famous horror films of the era, The Wolfman. And we have, of course, Lon Chaney Jr., as the Wolfman, and a host of other very famous actors from the periods of the 1930s and 40s in these movies. And this movie was a big hit. It was horrifying, it was frightening. And when you went to a movie, in the 1940s, this was it. This was absolutely blood-curdling, for those audiences in that time period, in that era. So it was a tremendous success. It spawned, other movies, The Wolfman Returns, and other movies, since there, with Lon Chaney Jr., I think he did 3 of them or so. The makeup was right incredible. But then again, he was a master at makeup. He did do this makeup himself because his father was the great silent screen actor, Lon Chaney. And Lon Chaney was known, as a master of horror films. And he was also a master of makeup. He was known as the man of 1,000 faces. And Lon Chaney was best known as the Phantom of the Opera, the very famous silent film from 1925, which was also an incredible hit and incredibly frightening for the audiences of the 1920s. In fact, just last weekend, last Saturday night after midnight, they gave the Phantom of the Opera. and I got to see it, and I hadn't seen it in many years. So it was like watching it over again watching it for the first time, brand new, and I could see how impressive, and it had its horror elements. It was extraordinary, and quite stylized, and Lon Chaney was just brilliant, portraying the Phantom, and quite horrifying looking, as well, just ghastly. I couldn't look too much at it because it was so frightening, actually, but his son inherited his gift, of creating tremendous makeups also. So 20 years later, we have, him becoming a famous actor as well. And this was his most well-known role as the Wolfman. And of course, they borrowed a lot from the traditions of ancient European cultures, about such things as wolfmen and werewolves running in the forests, especially in Germany, where so many of these fables and these stories come from. And because Germany, especially in the winter, can be quite an impressive, place, especially in the forests. And when you have in this country the most famous and most beautiful forest of them all, the Black Forest, you can create a great deal of amazing stories and things, and there are many legends, and there are many things that are associated with their forests there. The forests in Germany, and the Black Forest in particular, very much looks like a storybook forest that we've seen depicted over and over again in books, in magazines, and in film and television. And it's an absolutely beautiful place, but it can also be a very frightening looking place as well. And there are stories and legends of beings that live in those forests and have terrorized people and have caused a great deal of havoc and concern for centuries, there, with regards to cryptoids, cryptids, strange beings that are animal-like and human-like at the same time, and other things that we know of, such as Dracula, Frankenstein. A lot of those things have, let's say, a derivative that comes from reality. So they're not purely, let's say, legends. Myths, if you recall, are always based on some form of truth, on some form of real life experience in some form or another. That is their root. So there's always some reality and some truth as the basis of things that then become myth. So always remember that as well. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. So you see here, we have some scenes here from the famous Wolfman film, which was quite frightening for its time period and very legendary. And it's still wonderful to see and can be frightening as well. Of course, this film has sound. It was in 1941, so it has that other element. But it had some wonderful, well-known actors at the time, there in the film, like Claude Rains, for instance, very legendary actor of the 1930s and 40s. Evelyn Ankers, who is known as the Scream Queen, of Hollywood films, also very famous young lady also. We had legendary Russian actress, Maria Ospenskaya, portraying the Gypsy Maria, in this, film as well. And she was the one who recited the Wolfman's Creed, in the movie. And so we had some impressive people working in these films, big budget as well, and they were quite successful, but they brought the legend and the myth of the Wolfman to the American public. And from there, things started to happen and grow, from there. So moving along, with that, we will now talk about, this area of things regarding wolves. So we do know wolves as animals. We do know them as being in the wild, as these wondrous creatures or so that survive. But then stories started creeping up throughout the public and in small towns and more rural areas about people seeing and having encounters with creatures that were not necessarily those that we know that live in the woods, in the forests, or so on the plains, such as, of course, the wolf itself, or the buffalo, or the eagle, or the bear, or the badger, wolverines, or so. People were telling about other stories about animal-like beings, but they were more than that. And we hear stories from even to this day about such things, and we'll talk more about that in a moment as well. So we know that people have told for many countless generations, for decades, for hundreds of years, and even perhaps for thousands of years, about these strange encounters with these animal-like beings, but yet are not fully animal. There's something human to them. They're a combination of them. We now know them more as cryptids. And cryptozoology is the science of these beings, animal things that have some sort of human component to them. The American public now is starting to become more enlightened about cryptids. Recently, in the last 2 or 3 years or so, we see programming, especially in cable TV, that is starting to focus more on this area of the paranormal, this area of the metaphysical. They're starting to hone in more on these stories, these things that have happened to people who have related stories for many, many years ago. And we used to see them occasionally, let's say in newspapers like the Inquirer, the Star, the Globe. That is where we used to see these stories, written the most. But they were just regarded as fantasy or myth, or maybe somebody, having too much to drink or so and hallucinating or mentally ill. But they were interesting and fascinating to read about, even though there were people and scientists studying about these things at the time. But also there was a great deal of doubt and disbelief. It was very hard to find proof of these things. And even when there was some sort of proof or whatever, scientists as usually had a great deal of doubt to them and saying, oh, well, this is just some exaggerated thing or some anomaly of a particular creature or so. And that can happen from time to time. Where's the video? Where's the audio? We only have your verbal account, but we don't see anything more than this. And even people may have taken some pictures, but sometimes then they were casting doubt on them. Oh, it's someone in a suit, or it's something else. The quality of the picture is either too far away or too grainy or too blurred to be able to tell with 100% certainty that this indeed may be some sort of cryptoid, creature. There's always been doubt when it comes to these things, until fairly recently. Now, as the media is focusing more on presenting these types of experiences from eyewitnesses, from people who are willing to talk, from those who we heard about telling these types of stories or experiences from decades ago, talking about these things and going back to them after so long. And we're lucky that a lot of these people are still alive and with us. Some of them may be very old at this time, but they can still have their minds very sharp and clear. Their wits are about them and they can recall their stories quite clearly. And now we're having more of a focus on these stories. Finally, the public here, especially in the United States, is starting to become more aware. They're able to comprehend more about these incredible things, these incredible experiences, and not think so much anymore that these are incredulous, stories from a bunch of kooks or a bunch of drunk people or whatever, they're just telling stories just because they want recognition or fame or because there's just something wrong with them. Not anymore. That's starting to change more and more. And these people are starting to be more willing to talk about this once again, not that they're being approached, once again, in a way that's credible. For a long time, maybe reporters would come to them from time to time, but they would just shun them away or shy them away because they didn't want to be ridiculed. They didn't want to be harassed anymore, from the public, whether locally or extensively. Too much ridicule, too much disbelief. They were shunned. Some people had to move away even because it was just too much for them. And it caused a lot of trauma for a lot of people because they were not believed, but not so much anymore. As science has improved and we have more and greater technology, first of all, that can look after this and find the evidence and proof. And we're seeing that, there is more proof that's coming about, more tangible evidence. Now people are starting to take this more seriously. And they're starting to want to know about these stories as well, more seriously. And these people who were once not unwilling to speak up are now doing the opposite, because they are being shown respect. They're being shown that they are being truthful. They're shown that people are wanting to hear them with an open mind. And they're showing that there's more comprehension of such experiences. So these people are now willing, once again, to tell their stories. And as we see them doing that, others who may have been silent for many, many years, who never told a soul, or very few people, only those closest to them, family, friends, acquaintances, etc., are now also willing to speak and put themselves in front of a camera and talk about their experiences as well regarding these incredible, creatures and cryptids out in the world. One of the first of these stories that I saw in modern times, because I've always known about such things or so from way back then as well, when it was just stories basically in the supermarket tabloids or so, where I learned most about them or so. But now, because there's a resurgence in a different way, in a more serious way about them, we're seeing these stories once again, and now they're no longer tabloid fodder anymore. Now they're being presented on television, and there are entire programs devoted to them also. And we have people coming out and speaking about them. And one of the first in the modern era that I started learning about was about the Wolfman, or the Dogman as they're known as well too, which relates with werewolves also. So about 2.5 years ago, I saw this show called Terror in the Woods, as you see here on screen before you. And there was a couple that were talking about an experience they had one evening as they were driving their RV through Roanoke Island in Virginia. And they were just traveling, they were on vacation or so, and they had reached Roanoke Island at that point. It was late at night or so, and they were telling about their story, there. They went to someplace, and the people in this particular township near the Roanoke area or so kind of like looked at them kind of odd and kind of strange, was out there or so, and they found that a little weird as well, that people would be staring at them in a kind of odd way. And they were going off to find an RV camp to spend the evening or so. And someone there told them, you better be careful about where you're going. That particular area that you're planning to go to here is not exactly like the safest place, basically they were telling them. So you better think twice. But they were like eager to go or so. And they were able to go to Roanoke Islands in the North Carolina region or so. And there's also Roanoke, Virginia, as well. And they were traveling down the road or so, and then they saw, I don't remember all the details or so, but they seemed to pull over for a while. And as the gentleman was doing whatever he was doing over there, fixing something from the RV or so, he noticed or felt a presence. Now it was pitch dark, they were in the woods, they were all alone basically out there. And then he noticed in the distance, in the deep forest, there were these two red eyes staring back at him. And he was looking at this and getting a sense of dread about this. And he heard a growling, but a growling that he'd never heard before from a wild animal. This was a deeper, more powerful, thing. And then he espied, this big, dark creature with the red eyes looking right at him. And he was like, And his wife was sitting in the front of the RV. He was all the way in the back of it, and she couldn't really see, but she was getting a sense of something because she couldn't hear him or so. I don't know all the stories, but if you ever see Terror in the Woods in cable, usually the Travel Channel, have a look, and hopefully they'll show this episode. They do repeat it from time to time. And you can get a real, look at this, episode. It was quite fascinating. It just captivated me. I was just stunned. But more than anything else, my senses and my spirit started telling me that there was something to this. I had never heard about the dog man before. So this was a new thing for me. And I was drawn to it. And I'm listening to this gentleman. It was the actual people that had this experience, and then they were depicted by some actors as they did the reenactment. But he noticed that the wolf creature was staring back at him, and then all of a sudden stood up on two legs, and he could hear the bones snapping as the creature did this. And then it took more of a humanoid form. So when the creature started stepping forward more, he saw that this being was about 7 feet tall or more, must have weighed about 400 to 500 pounds, a big, hairy creature with red eyes and incredible teeth, looked like a wolf, and was heading toward him, walked toward him. And if you can see the picture here that I have placed here, it looked very much like that. So there are these two people out in the dark woods late at night, and the gentleman is seeing this, standing in front of him and coming at him. Luckily, he had a very powerful gun with him, and as the creature started approaching him, he fired 1 or 2 shots, dead aim right at it, and nothing. It seemed like the bullets either bounced off the creature, just went through him or whatever, and it did absolutely nothing. At one point there, the wolf man was about 30 feet away from him, so you got a good look at him, which is why we have this depiction here, because this is what he accurately described the creature to look like. So imagine being out there at 2 or 3 in the morning or so, being faced by a 7-foot wolf being, 400 or 500 pounds that could rip your head off, with gigantic claws, with no problem whatsoever. So it was quite a tremendous trauma for the gentleman, but he held it together. He fired another shot or so, whatever, didn't back down, and he just went to his, RV, and they drove off. And luckily, the wolf being did do nothing else but just growl at him and stare at him. But as he was heading to his RV and looked back, he noticed that there were another 2 sets of eyes in the woods behind the wolf man. So there was obviously more than one there, and perhaps who knows how many of these creatures were out there. And luckily he was able to speed off of there, and they drove off. And the lady didn't really, she just heard the noise. She didn't really see the creature, but she knew there was something there, and she was just as frightened, and they escaped, and they were lucky. But seeing both of them telling this story, and seeing the genuine fear that they had, and these 2 people were obviously very sane, very clear of mind, never had experiences like this before. You can see how genuine and how real they were. That also caught my attention as well greatly. And seeing this depicted, and I got a very strong sense that this is real. There's something here. And it's incredible to know this, that there are these types of beings out there in the woodlands, existing there for God knows how long. And besides beings such as, Sasquatch and the Mothman and Mantis Man and, the Ogopogo, there's another type of being as well, up in the northern region, and all these other incredible beings and things. There are things out there in the woods, in the forests, that we are just starting to open up more to. And there are many, many, many people who have had incredible experiences with these things. They have seen them. They have been terrorized by them. Countless people from all ages, all backgrounds, respectable people, people who are of sound mind, have never been prone to thinking about such things, have had no belief in a lot of these things, but once they encountered one of these things, it turned their whole reality around. And this happens in many parts of the world. Here in the United States, as I have been doing research and study on these, I've come to notice that a lot of these particular cryptoid beings seem to be more prevalent, more in the northeastern section of the United States, going down to the southeast as well, moving along to, let's say, the mid-north, mid-south region of the country, and moving into the Midwest, also, and north, mid-north section of this country also. So we've heard about these types of beings in places even as close as New Jersey. We've heard of New Jersey Devil, for instance, very famous being, there. New Jersey is a state that has tremendous vast woodlands and forests, thousands of acres of lands and forests. Beings such as these can live very safely and roam all these lands there comfortably for them. Yet people who go out into these areas for vacation, for cycling, hiking, or whatever, who may live close by or fairly close by, will go fishing in the lakes and the ponds there, go for rides, go for picnics there. And at night they've camped over. And many of them have told stories about such beings as I just mentioned, and seeing them, hearing them. Some have attempted to take pictures of them. Others have tracks of them. They put cement over them. They have photographs of those things. Scientists, whatever, have looked at this. People, primatologists, archaeologists or so, have looked at these things. A lot of them can't really explain what these things are. Hair samples have been collected. A lot of times they can say easily, oh no, that's a deer hair, that's that's something else, it's a bear hair, whatever. But sometimes there's hair there that may incorporate things that we don't really know what this is. Or it may have some DNA mixture that might seem more human. We're starting to hear more and more of that coming out finally. Before, scientists would just keep it quiet. The government would keep it quiet. They've always known that there's something there. They just didn't want the rest of the public to know. For whatever reasons, they're keeping it quiet. More about that in a bit. So, as we're talking about such beings or so, as you see, we saw Virginia has known a great deal about a lot of cryptids, such as Sasquatch, the Dogman, the Wolfman, beings of West Virginia. Kentucky has been known also for beings such as Sasquatch as well. Tennessee, the woodlands there. The eastern seaboard, as I said, the north, even New York upstate, we've heard of these types of creatures or so as well. We can move more into the western section. So we can move into the states of Michigan, for instance, Wisconsin also have tales and experiences with these types of creatures, especially with beings such as Sasquatch, the Missouri monster Momo, for instance, from Missouri, as well, the Yahoo as well from down south, the skunk ape from Florida, Alabama, also, which is through the Everglades and those regions there in the Great South as well. So the Southeast, the Mid-South as well, Louisiana, the swamps, the Lugaru, also, and all these types of cryptid forms of creatures. The Mothman of New Jersey or so as well. Or is it New Jersey? No, I forgot what Mothman was, but Point Pleasant, this is North Carolina or so. The Mothman, for instance, as well, that lives in the woods but has made its presence known, flying around, and people have seen it. That's another cryptoid as well also. So we see that the northern to the mid-north area and the northern section and southern section, the eastern seaboard, has a lot of stories pertaining to these particular beings. But then the Midwest also has cryptoids as well and cryptids as well. We can move, of course, to the Southwest, where we also have Native American beliefs in the skinwalkers, which are creatures that are shapeshifters. And one of the forms that they take greatly is that of the wolf or wolfman type creature. And those are terrifying, and they're pure evil. A lot of the native tribes do not even speak of such a thing. They don't even want to verbalize or mention it, even amongst themselves, for fear that it calls up the energy and the spirit, because these creatures are so powerful, and then it may draw them to them and cause great trauma, which has been known to occur to many people in the Southwest, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. We recently had a series, there based on that, on the Skinwalker Ranch, where they had scientific studies, there, and provided, looking for evidence. There's a lot of incredible things happening in that particular area there, that particular zone in the Skinwalker Ranch area. That's a whole other show in itself. That's a whole other thing that I could do. But it does have the connection with the wolf there, because they have seen it. They've seen this shapeshifter there. There was a famous experience there with the former owners back in the 1990s. I was seeing this giant wolf coming, on the first day or so when they, moved into the ranch, and taking one of their calves, from the fence and shooting at it. And the bullets did nothing, to this creature. And other things that happened there. Of course, now they are the former owners of it, because so much happened there. But there was this wolf-like creature known as a skinwalker that came, upon them, and they saw it and experienced that. We also have a very famous experience known as the Beast of Bray Road. And this is in Wisconsin. And this particular section, this particular road in Wisconsin, in Elkhorn, Wisconsin, has been known for decades, and God knows for even how much further back, about these wolf-like creatures, these dogmen that have been sighted, have been seen from time to time from many people that live in the town and in the area, in the middle of the night or so, running, chasing away into the fields or so. So as it says here, the Beast of Bray Road is a creature reported in 1936 and the 1990s, and now in the 2000s as well. People have seen this being as well, also, and they're doing studies on this too. On a rural road outside of Elkhorn, Wisconsin, the same label has been applied to other sightings from southern Wisconsin and northern Illinois. Bray Road is a quiet rural road near the community of Elkhorn. And I see, as you can see here, I've placed a picture of the open space, there alongside the road, there in Bray Road. But there are some people that have farms nearby, also. It's a well-traveled road. You have to go through it in order to go from town to town. So it's not something that is so rural that people never go to it. It's traveled frequently. And there's a community there, and there's a farmer that lives not too far off from there who's had some experiences also. There's recent shows that have been, focusing on this particular, space here. In fact, there was a new show called Paranormal Declassified, which I find to be very, very good. It's by a reporter named Paul Beeben. And he is approaching this as a reporter, as a journalist, but also with a scientific perspective, as well, from the metaphysical, the paranormal aspect of things. So he is connecting with people who have reports of these things. He interviews them. These are some well-known people who were the first who report about such things, or those who have known people from the past. He's gone to the places themselves. He's done research. He's set up the cameras, the equipment, the technology. He brings in people with technology to see about such things. He did a recent study there at Bray Road. And he was communicating there with a gentleman who moved there about 10 years ago, who bought a farm there, and who's also been doing studies of this, and who's had some interesting experiences also there on Bray Road, and has provided some evidence as well too about it. So there have been sightings of these things, in this landmass, as you see there right next to Bray Road. This is a depiction of what one of those dogmen creature looked like, and then if you see the lower right-hand side, there is a print that was caught in the snow, photographed there. And as you can see from the size of that print, this is a quite formidable, creature. They're known to be between 7 to 8 feet tall. You can see they have 6 toes and 5 pads. which is not common for any kind of canine species, especially with 5 pads. No such canine species that we are aware of has that. The most they have is 3 pads, no matter how large they are, even as regular wolves. This is a more extensive and larger creature. And it is quite impressive and quite frightening to even see this. And there have many pictures and many things like this throughout the decades of such things. Now people and scientists are starting to take more, let's say, more of an interest, more of a genuine interest in studying these things and taking this more as truth, as opposed to some sort of story or myth. So we see that there. In addition, we also have here, as we see, more about the Wisconsin Wolfman, as it's known also. So as you see throughout the years, it's been posted in different newspaper articles, magazine articles. Here's something that looks like the National Enquirer, for instance, to make it look more fantastic, and more, frightening and appealing, for the audience. We have an article here from the 1970s, about this beast. It's been known for many, many years. I just, as I said, found out about it like about 2 years or so ago. This is new to me, but as I've been doing my research and study, I started to see, oh my God, this has been known for many, many years, for decades, in this particular area. I don't know how I never heard about it, because the media didn't pay attention. They were not taking this seriously. They just thought it was some foolishness or so. Now that's changed. Here we have a more recent picture of something that they say over the internet that it actually is one of those dogmen creatures, because we have here a wolf or wolf-like creature walking on 2 of its legs, on its hind legs. Unusual, because wolves don't usually walk on their hind legs or so. This looks more like a regular wolf, but there's a lot of debate about how accurate, how truthful this picture is, because we see here that the arm on the right over here where I'm pointing at is really, it looks like to appear to be like the skin is removed, the muscles are removed. All we see are like the bone, just bones that are connecting there and loose, and perhaps maybe like a paw pad. And even the other arm seems to be like deformed as well, on the left arm too. So there's debate as to whether this is real, first of all, or fake. Can such a wolf perhaps have had sustained an accident of some kind, or had been born with these deformities and had learned how to basically walk and move on its hind legs only in order to survive? So there's a lot of talk of speculation about this, and they're looking into this more and more and more. So there's a lot, going on. There's a lot of debate still. There's a lot of doubt with these things, but they're looking more for evidence and proof. As I said, we now have more technology that's advanced, in regards to, infrared, LiDAR, sounds or so. We can put on in the middle of the night and leave there for an entire night or entire week or even more, 24 hours, to see if something can be captured. These beings are very elusive, and they have been for centuries. It's very, very difficult to capture evidence of these creatures. Very difficult. And even then, when there is, even if there is some, let's say, good evidence that is presented, it's met with skepticism, with doubt at times, because there's just a tinge of something there looking like it could be faked. It could be CGI, special effects, with photographs, with video or so. It's hard to tell. Some of it can be very, very good, but it's very difficult to tell. A lot of these people have not been attacked also by these beings exactly. That's another thing. We don't have a bunch of witnesses seeing an actual attack of a person by one of these beings. And if anything, they seem to shy away and run away from people usually. If they come at you with aggression, people tend to run away, and they may chase, but they never seem to capture people. They just go off and they disappear, which is very interesting to see the level of intellect, of knowing, of consciousness with these beings, also. And the way they can move about and can one moment be there and then just start walking away and then just seemingly vanish before your eyes is another fascinating facet of these beings as well. There are countless stories also about these beings just taking 1, 2, 3 steps, and then they vanish, they disappear into the forest or even before your eyes, which tells about the nature of these beings also. What are they exactly? Who are they exactly? How can they do this? Here we have the Michigan Dog Man, which is another famous, case, which is a mysterious cryptid that has made many appearances throughout Michigan, sometimes in various neighboring states, as I've mentioned before, the upper north, northeast, mid-north, has many, accounts of such beings here. And we can also move outward, again, once again to the southwest, to the Pacific Northwest as well, especially we know the states of Oregon, Washington. We know that about Sasquatch, Bigfoot, especially being prevalent in the states of Oregon and Washington. In fact, if any of you have seen the story on the Bigfoot expedition, which is now starting their second season also, which is the first real serious scientifically based series focusing on capturing evidence, of Bigfoot with people who are experts, there, scientific, world-renowned and respected experts taking part in these 3-week expeditions. They have the latest technology also aiding them, and they're looking desperately to try to capture some form of evidence in some way, about these creatures. They hope to make some sort of contact with them. So they just started their second season. I recommend it. It's a very interesting series. And this year they are actually in Kentucky, I do believe. Their first season was in Oregon, there. And they captured some interesting evidence there, and they're just still analyzing. And now they're in Kentucky for another 3-week expedition, there. So moving back to Michigan, however, we have, the Michigan Dogman, as it's known, is first being seen in Wexford County. It is often described as having the body of a man and the head of a dog, or simply a large dog that walks on 2 legs. Now, the picture to your right here is an official sketch of what that dog man looks like. And as I've seen and researched before from other people, their depictions, their drawings or so, this looks very much exactly what this being actually, looks like in person. So fabulous, depiction, incredibly frightening. I've heard that these beings have a mesmerizing effect on people. They are very, very vicious in their countenance. They look and seem to be very evil, also. If they could eat you, they would. They could kill you instantly. No problem. No problem at all. They're so powerful and so strong. And they exude this certain influence over people. So people are obviously quite frightened to be encountering such a thing. And that's why it's so hard, like for someone just to take out their cell phone and take a snapshot of it, because you're so paralyzed in fear, because you are not expecting anything like this. Just imagine, you're not brought up believing in these things or so, whatever. You think they're stories or fables. And all of a sudden, you're in some place and whatever, and you encounter something like that, or it encounters you. You think you're going to be thinking about, let me take my video camera out and videotape this thing. Whatever. You are so paralyzed with fear, as so many of these people have stated. They are so full of fear that their thinking practically goes, they don't know what to do. They're frozen a lot of times, or running. And if those who have guns or whatever, they are firing their firearms, at them, trying to escape these things. And you don't think about, taking a picture, and getting evidence. You think about surviving and saving your life. So it's very hard. Those who have a little more wit about them or so, maybe. But it's very, very difficult, very hard. These beings are very elusive. Some people have been attacked by them, by the way. But for the most part, it seems that they've always managed to escape. I haven't really heard of anyone being killed by one of these things, but yet there's a lot of people that have disappeared, also, without a trace. We go to Alaska, for instance, which is another focal point now of the media. They're starting to place their attention in the great state of Alaska. It has a tremendous history of the paranormal, there's a place called the Alaska Triangle there, because of beings such as this, Sasquatch, and more that people have seen, experienced, and have countless stories, have been traumatized by there as well. There's a recent, series also based on the Alaska cryptids. And I'm sure they'll be filming a season 2, with that. So now they're focusing on that. We're learning more about the state of Alaska, also. They haven't paid too much attention to it before because it's such a remote, place, first of all. It's so vast as well, and so incredibly cold. But now again, with new technology and with more that's being discovered and being made to be known and being seen that Alaska has a wealth of paranormal phenomenon that they can, offer, to us to learn about, they're now putting their focus and scientific study and research into Alaska and the incredible experiences that are happening and have happened there. So we see this creature here in Michigan has been well known for many, many years and decades. Also, it is said also to be about 7 feet tall. In some cases has blue eyes, in other cases amber eyes, bipedal canine like animal, with the torso of a man and a fearsome, human scream, or a scream that's rather guttural and animal-like, but is unlike anything that people have ever heard before. And even people who've been experienced in the woods, hunters, the trappers that live out there for decades or so. And they say, and they've heard every creature, they've seen every creature that's out there. But when they have heard such a thing in the middle of the night or seen it, they say they've never encountered anything like that. They've never heard of anything like that before in all their years. And it's different. And it tells you something from there. The Michigan Dogman appears in a 10-year cycle, so they say, that falls on years ending in 7. Sightings have been reported in several locations throughout Michigan, primarily in the northwestern quadrant of the Lower Peninsula. In 1987, the legend of the Michigan Dogman gained popularity when a disc jockey, Steve Cook of WTC-FM, recorded a song about the creature and its reported sightings. That's become well known in that area of the United States. I saw an interview with him. He's an interesting dude, and he's become well known for that. And there's a film called the Gable film that you can find on YouTube. That's one of the most famous videos or some kind of evidence about the Dogman. There's a lot of debate on whether it's real or not. A lot of people say that they debunked it and that it's fake. And I think that somebody put it together, but it's done, kind of well. There's another picture here to your left in the center of a Dogman encounter in Big Rapids, Michigan. This was shot in 1961. One of the better, more clearer pictures there. You can look at this in the internet. Just type in the internet search Dogman, Big Rapids, Michigan, and you'll see various pictures of this in various sizes. And here by the light post, there is a wolf-like being standing on its 2 hind legs, there, looking rather humanoid and fearsome, there. They say that this is real or so. The picture goes back a long way. It's one of those rare good depictions, of this, here. We also have heard of these wolf-like creatures also in South America as well. And there are towns in Brazil and Argentina, especially in Brazil, that are well known, for having their werewolves, their dogmen there also. Many people have experienced these, beings as well too. The picture that you see before you is one of the best photographs taken in the middle of the night on a street, of one of these dogmen werewolves, walking in the middle of the night there. And it was spied, by a street camera or someone apparently from distance got a shot of this. Again, as usual, a lot of people say that this is fake. It's been CGI, but a lot of people say that no, that this is actually a true, picture of one of these. And these beings usually appear in the town of Zealandia, which is well known as the werewolf capital of South America. The town has made it known as a tourist attraction for this. There's lots of shops there with a lot of souvenirs and gifts pertaining to the werewolves of Zealandia and of Brazil. And it's a destination to go to, but it has a long history of people having experiences, with this. And they say that some people can turn into a werewolf especially when a boy in particular turns 13. So there are variations of this story as well. They can see them on Lent on a Friday or during a full moon, only for 2 hours between the hours of midnight and 2 a.m. There are 2 attacks by a wolf man or a dog man reported in Brazil in 2008 and 2009. A woman in Sansepe told police she was attacked on January 28th, 2009. Isn't that interesting? January 28th. Our next full wolf moon is on January 28th this year, 2021. How fascinating. And I just noticed that myself for the first time here. Synchronicities work. Let's see what happens this January 28th in Brazil, in the town of Ceilândia this year. I'll keep an eye on it. If I hear or see anything that they report, I will let you know. But as she was saying, she was attacked by a big dog that stood on its hind legs and walked like a man. In 2008, Toa received numerous reports of a half-man, half-wolf that was stealing sheep and breaking into houses. And these are just 2 or 3 stories of hundreds, if not thousands of stories throughout the years of people reporting such things. The people there believe greatly in these things, as do the people in Europe, especially in Germany and England. So they believe, a lot of them, that these things, and they know that these things are real. So the Brazilian werewolf is, of course, another cryptid. And there are other places in Argentina also that can report these as well. South America has a strong history in the paranormal as well. And we don't hear enough about that here in the United States. It inspires me to perhaps focus and do a show on South America paranormal. I report about these things as well. They have quite extraordinary things with a lot of incredible evidence pertaining to this type of form, as well as to unidentified flying objects. Through Brazil, Argentina, they have tremendous experiences there and tremendous videos there on these things. They just don't mention them enough here in this country, which is a shame. They need to, talk about that, there as well. And they need to do research there as well, because the people there have a closer affinity with these things. These things, for some reason, are more visible there than in this country here. And the continent of South America is a large place. It is a continent after all. I've been there. I went to Argentina 2 years ago, and they're quite impressive. They're very, very brilliant people. Also they have a lot of the latest technology scientifically. Also, many brilliant people there as well. They take this very, very seriously. There in those countries. So we really need to look more into them and learn more from them and about them. So we have all of this, here. And let's see. So basically, coming down to conclusion, the wolf symbolism and meaning is great as totems, spirit omens, creatures of reality. And this is what captivated me, or really has piqued my interest the most with this subject. Especially, I've known about certainly Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Momo, the skunk ape for years. I had studied about them, researched them for many decades as well. And they caught my attention too. And then that kind of dropped out in the public. So it kind of dropped out of my psyche as well. And at that point, I was developing more from my psycho-spiritual level of things and working more in this realm of the psychic, the spiritual, the medium, the connections, or the energy or so. But in the last 3 years or so, I was starting to be drawn more towards learning about these beings as well, because they fall under the umbrella of paranormal and metaphysical as well. And as I started to do that, I started noticing that also there was being more presented about these beings and these creatures, as well. So synchronicity was coming, and I was attuned to the spirit of the times. And now we see more of this, and there will be more, scientific research and more programs devoted to this area of the paranormal, cryptozoology as it's called, also. So be prepared for that. As I mentioned, one of them, Paranormal Classified or Declassified with Paul Beeben. He's been doing a number of excellent, series, on these subject matters. And his approach is realistic, scientific, but also metaphysical and paranormal as well. He has a nice blending of everything. He doesn't leave things out. He is open mind and he embraces all. He wants to get at the truth. And if there's metaphysical, paranormal, and it's true, so be it. That could solve the whole mystery here. It may not be through scientific means or so. It can be, and may most likely be, through the paranormal. Something will break and we'll get that evidence that we need that's so unmistakable that no one can deny it in one of these areas here. And it's getting closer. We are getting closer to discovering Sasquatch, to discovering Bigfoot. We may be getting closer to discovering, the werewolf and the wolf man, the dog men here, and these other beings as well. There's also a close association with the cryptids and with unidentified flying objects, with extraterrestrial experience. Many times, whenever there's a sighting of one of these beings, there's also a sighting nearby on the same experience, the same evening, the same event of extraterrestrial experience. Also, they seem to be working together. They're linked together. They may be from those places, from the extraterrestrials in some way, shape, or form. They may be working together. There's evidence and people who have talked about this, who have seen this for themselves. They're looking more into that. So there is most likely a very strong connection between the two. And they're looking more into that as well. So besides the wolf symbolism having so much meaning here on earth in all these forms and ways, we also have them in religion and spirituality as well. So we see that wolf symbolism, thanks to pop culture, conjures up images of lichens, shapeshifters, and feral dogs howling at the moon. In reality, a wolf represents many different and interesting things that range from good to evil to even romantic and sacred. So if you're wondering what do wolves symbolize? Well, wolf symbolism can be ambiguous, ranging from negative associations with darkness, aggression, and chthonic powers to positive wolf characteristics like curiosity, intelligence, playfulness, fierce protectiveness of their young, their pack, allegiance, formidable hunting skills, and dearly and clearly defined social structure. So wolves have also fascinated men or people since the early days because they look so similar to dogs, man's best friend. They are closely linked to the light, sun, moon, and spirit. Wolves also guide the dead and are closely linked to Hades, the god of the underworld. And there's so much more. There's so much more to read up. I encourage you to find out more. If you found this subject interesting, fascinating, there's a wealth of information on the internet about the different areas and the different belief systems and the different characteristics, definitions, and the different traits and the lives, of wolves and what they mean. For me, I've learned a tremendous amount about these incredible beings, and I will be learning more about them in particular and keeping an eye on what else develops in regards to the field of the paranormal, of scientific research, cryptozoology. I will keep you informed about anything that occurs, any breakthroughs that happen. Watch this series on television. They're fabulous. There's also another one called the Atlas of the Obscures, of the Atlas of the Darkness or whatever, something like that, which is another very good series also. And there's one on National Geographic, The History of Mysteries as well. And it's wonderful to see the National Geographic channel devote programming to these subject matters of the paranormal, where they never really did, so much in the past. Now they too are focusing in, and they're presenting them in a way that's respectable, that's scientific, that's logical, incorporating all areas of these incredible experiences or so. That one is hosted by Lawrence Fishburne, The History of Mysteries, and that is on the National Geographic Channel. The Atlas of the Dark, or so I think it's called, is on the Travel Channel as well, or A&E. And there's a gentleman there who is also a researcher and a scientist as well, and his show is also very much aligned in that way, doing scientific research on these types of things as well. So it's no longer just, these shows like in the past, that talk into the fantastic things of it and just describing the metaphysical or the spiritual things and making it like, kind of ooh, and kind of, just, basic, it's just the spirit or so, what is it? And making it creepy or so. Not these series. These series are taking a serious approach to this subject matter and material. Watch them. That indicates to me that they're starting to realize that there's something more to this. There's something concrete about these things. For me, it also shows me and really woke up my senses to something that I may have suspected latently within me regarding these beings and these creatures, such as the Wolfman, for instance, and thinking, oh, these are just incredible stories and incredible tales or so. But could there be something true? And from time to time in the past, people have told about true stories about such things, and people who've had these experiences or have been these types of things or so, from Europe, from this country even. But now we're starting to see that what was once thought as myth or a story actually has fact and reality associated to it. It's very exciting, but it's also very frightening as well, because we must be cautious about this. Being ignorant and being distant to these things perhaps has also, and most likely has, protected us from them as well. But should we start to uncover and start to see and get at the truth and discover the truth, we may not be as protected as we once were anymore. And we may be opening the door to something that maybe would have been better to have left shut. Be careful what you wish for. You may just get it. So we better be prepared to face these things and know how to deal with them in order to keep ourselves protected and intact. Seeing something like the wolf man, for instance, or werewolf, being something that's real, is indeed fascinating to me and to many others also. But if the werewolf does turn out to be really fact and is indeed real, which it seems to be, then what does that say about other beings of myth and legend also, such as vampires, ghouls, and other creatures of that kind, where many have said in the past that they have had experiences with those that are real also. That strongly indicates that those beings as well are real. And as scientific research is looking into them as well, there is more to come, more to find out, more to discover, but perhaps even more to be frightened about as well. Again, be careful what you ask for. You may just get it. We have to be prepared. We have to know what we're doing. And we'd better make sure that we can handle these things should they finally reveal themselves and come into being. I hope that you have found this program to be enlightening, educational, fascinating, exciting even at times, and that it piques your curiosity and your interests to learn more on your own. And on that note, I will wish all of you a wonderful and good evening. Blessings to you. Look upon the full wolf moon on the 28th. Say a prayer. Do a meditation. Ask for something. Connect with your wolf spirit, your wolf guide, your wolf essence. Ask it to empower you, to embrace you in its energy and in its light. Thank you for joining me this evening. I hope there are many blessings for you for this weekend and for the rest of the week. And I'll see you next week on Metaphysical Communion on the Angelus Cologne Transpsychic Express and on Metaphysical Communion channel on YouTube. Once again, good night.